My name is Dr. Alan Carter. My job is to study things that are long dead, buried under the layers of history. But this isn't a story about the dead. It's about something that was never able to die. It all began in late August, 2 years ago, with a phone call to the archaeology department at the University of Texas at Austin. The caller was a rancher from Crockett County, a man named Jedediah Stone. He spoke slowly with a heavy Texas drawl, and he wasn't complaining about a discovery, but a feeling. A strange vibration in the ground on his farthest pasture, where he was planning to drill a new well for water. He said you could feel it through the soles of your feet, a low, constant hum that was making his cattle lame. I drove out there without much enthusiasm, taking my graduate student, Sarah Jenkins, with me. 90% of these calls are just overactive imaginations, soil subsidence, or old equipment running on a neighboring property. Stone's ranch was 1,000 acres of sun-scorched earth, flat and monotonous to the horizon. The air shimmered with heat. Stone, a sturdy man in his 60s with a face like tan leather, met us at his house and silently led us to his pickup truck. We drove for 15 minutes down a dusty track until the truck stopped in the middle of a completely empty field. "Here," he said, cutting the engine. We got out. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the chirping of cicadas. I didn't feel anything. Neither did Sarah. Stone looked at us with imperturbable patience. "You gotta stand for a bit," he said. "It ain't always the same. Sometimes it quiets down." We stood there for 10 minutes. I was about to make my polite excuses, citing natural seismic tremors, when it started. It was barely perceptible at first, like a heavy truck passing far in the distance, but the source wasn't on the horizon. It was directly beneath our feet, a low-frequency, deep vibration that pulsed up through the soles of our boots and resonated somewhere in our chests. It didn't grow louder, it simply became distinct. Sarah looked at me, her eyes wide. "You feel it?" Stone asked. I nodded. The sensation was physical and deeply unpleasant. It wasn't like a natural earthquake. The tremor was monotonous, with a constant, unchanging frequency. We had brought a portable geophone with us. When I placed the sensors on the ground, the seismograph's needle, instead of showing chaotic spikes, began to draw a nearly perfect low-frequency sine wave. It was impossible. Natural sources don't behave like that, and neither do artificial ones. For an effect like this, a gigantic tuning fork would have to be operating underground. I showed the readout to Sarah. She frowned. What could it be? A secret military project? Out here, on private land, in the middle of nowhere with nothing on the maps? Unlikely, I replied. We stayed for several hours, taking measurements. The frequency never changed, exactly 12 hertz. The source's depth, according to our preliminary calculations, was between 20 and 30 feet. Jedediah Stone sat on the tailgate of his pickup the entire time, watching us in silence. As the sun began to set, he said, "It gets stronger at night. Not louder, but denser. I can't sleep. Even in the house, the bed shakes." Back at the university, I showed the data to the head of our department, Dr. Miles Warren. He stared at the geophone printouts for a long time, then at the topographical maps. He was a skeptic to the core, but the numbers convinced him. He allocated a minimal budget for an exploratory drill and a test pit. 3 days later, we were back at Stone's ranch with a small drilling rig and a couple workers. Drilling down to 15 feet yielded nothing but samples of dense clay and limestone. The vibration under our feet was constant. The workers were nervous, complaining of headaches. At the 20-foot mark, the drill hit something solid. The rig operator said it wasn't bedrock. The drill bit couldn't bite into it. It just skidded across the surface. We decided to dig. The excavation took 4 days. The heat was grueling. We worked in shift from early morning until noon, sweat pouring into our eyes. The ground was as hard as concrete. Gradually, in the center of our square pit, a perfectly flat surface of dark, almost black color began to emerge. It wasn't basalt or obsidian. The material was smooth, without a single pore, and cold to the touch even under the scorching sun. When we had cleared a 10 by 10-foot section, it became clear that this wasn't a boulder. It was a man-made slab. By the end of the week, we had expanded the dig to 30 by 30 feet. Beneath the layer of clay and compacted earth lay the roof of a colossal structure. It was rectangular, and its edges extended far beyond the limits of our pit. The surface was made of massive, seamless black blocks, fitted together with such precision that you couldn't slide a knife blade between them. We took a sample of the material. Lab analysis in Austin showed it was a type of granite, but with an abnormally high density and containing unknown metals that gave it its color. But the most important finding came from the thermoluminescence analysis. The age of the fired quartz particles clinging to the slab surface was at least 14,000 years. This was several millennia older than any known megalithic structure on the planet, older than Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. Dr. Warren drove out himself the next day. He walked around the pit for a long time, frowning and shaking his head. The vibration had become so intense by then that being near was physically difficult. It induced nausea and disorientation. Warren, a man of science, couldn't find an explanation. "It's impossible, Alan," he told me. "There were no civilizations here capable of this. The Clovis people were making spear points, not megaliths." "And yet, here it is," I replied. We decided to look for an entrance. For a full day, we inspected the perimeter of the excavated roof section. No seams, hatches, or cracks. It was a monolith. In desperation, I had the workers sweep the entire surface with metal detectors. One of them froze on the northern side of the slab. The device was emitting a steady, high-pitched tone. We began to carefully clean the area with brushes, and that's when we saw them. Carved into the surface of the stone, where the detector had beeped, were symbols. They weren't filled with paint or any other material, just engraved with mathematical precision. They were unlike any known language or pictograph. Not cuneiform, not hieroglyphs, not runes. They were complex combinations of straight lines, circles, and spirals, forming patterns that looked simultaneously like circuit board diagrams and mandalas. They were arranged in a circle about 3 feet in diameter. In the center of the circle was a single deep indentation, like a keyhole of a strange shape. The sun was setting. Jedediah Stone, who came every day to watch our work, walked to the edge of the pit. We all stood there, staring at the symbols, trying to comprehend the scale of the discovery. And in that moment, everything changed. Just as the last sliver of the sun disappeared below the horizon, the vibration stopped. A complete, deafening silence fell. We exchanged glances. Sarah let out a sigh of relief. The silence lasted for about 10 seconds, and then, from beneath the ground, from the very heart of the structure, came a sound. It was no longer a vibration you could only feel. It was a low, steady humming sound at the same 12 hertz frequency, but now it was audible. It wasn't loud, but it was all-pervading. It seemed to come from everywhere at once. The sound was pure without overtones or distortion, as if generated by a perfect source. It pressed on the eardrums, causing a primal sense of anxiety. We froze. The workers backed away from the pit. Sarah pressed her hands to her ears, though it didn't help. The sound penetrated the body. Jedediah Stone stared at the excavation. Without blinking, his face pale. "It does that every night," he said quietly. "Only it used to be quieter. It gets louder every day." I pulled out my phone to call Warren, but the screen showed no service. None of us had a signal. Out here in the middle of the field, cell service was always weak, but now it was completely gone. All the instruments we had brought for measurements went dark. Only the old mechanical compass in my pocket still worked, and its needle was spinning wildly, unable to find north. I looked at the circle of symbols on the slab. In the gathering dusk, I thought I saw them glow faintly from within, a cold, whitish light. I blinked, and the glow was gone. Probably just a trick of the eye, a tired brain's reaction to the anomalous sound. None of us left that night. We stayed at Stone's house, but sleep wouldn't come. The hum was relentless. It seeped through the walls, the floor, and seemed to vibrate in our very bones. We sat at the kitchen table, silently drinking coffee. There was no desire to speak. Any words were drowned out by that all-consuming, monotonous drone. It was like the breathing of something unimaginably vast, sleeping right beneath us, and we had woken it up. Dawn came suddenly like the flick of a switch. In an instant, the pervasive hum, which had seemed to become a part of our hearing, simply vanished. The silence that followed was almost painful. We sat in Jedediah's kitchen, exhausted and sleep-deprived. I pulled out my phone. One bar signal had appeared. A text from Dr. Warren said he'd be on site by 9 a.m., and he wasn't coming alone. Jedediah looked the worst of all. Dark circles pooled under his eyes. His skin seemed gray. He complained of ceaseless ringing in his ears that hadn't stopped even after the humming ceased. Like a cricket's taken up residence in my head, he said, massaging his temples. His hands trembled slightly as he lifted his coffee cup. I chalked it up to stress and a sleepless night. But a sense of unease settled deep inside me. He had been exposed to the vibration for far longer than any of us. By 9 a.m., 2 black SUVs pulled up to the ranch. Dr. Warren, looking deeply concerned, got out of the first one. He was followed by 2 others. Dr. Ben Jacobs, our lead geophysicist, a tall, bustling man with a shock of graying hair who immediately began unpacking equipment, and Dr. Evelyn Reed from the linguistics and epigraphy department. She was a short woman in her 50s with incredibly attentive and perceptive eyes, a specialist in dead languages and proto-writing systems. I briefly outlined the situation for them. The age, the material, the hum that appeared precisely at sunset and disappeared at sunrise. Jacobs nodded along, already deploying the cables for his ground-penetrating radar. Evelyn Reed said nothing, her gaze fixed on the excavation pit. She walked to the edge and stood motionless. "May I go down?" she asked quietly. I helped her down the rickety ladder. She knelt before the circle of symbols, not touching the surface. She took a magnifying glass with a built-in light and a pair of gloves from her bag. For several minutes, she studied the engravings in complete silence. Warren and I stood above, watching. "Well," he asked impatiently. Evelyn slowly raised her head. The look in her eyes was one I had never seen on a scholar before, a mixture of absolute awe and professional terror. "This is no precedent," she said, her voice steady but laced with tremor. "Nothing. Not Sumerian cuneiform, not Egyptian hieroglyphs, not the Indus Valley script, not Proto-Elamite. It doesn't even remotely resemble the Vinca symbols. These are not pictures or stylized representations. Look at the syntax, the repeating clusters. This is a complex, structured system of signs. It's a language, and we have absolutely no idea of its origin." She ran a gloved finger a few millimeters above one of the lines. "The execution, it's perfect. The depth and width of the carving don't vary by a single micron. This wasn't done by hand. Or it was done by a hand whose level of skill is beyond our comprehension." Meanwhile, Ben Jacobs had finished his preliminary scan. He called us over to his monitor. The screen showed a 3-dimensional model of the subterranean space. "It's huge, Miles," he said to Warren. "Much bigger than you thought. The slab you've uncovered is just the tip. The structure goes down at least 100 feet. It's shaped like a perfect cube, or at least the top part one. The material density is off the charts. The radar can barely penetrate it. The signal just scatters. But I can tell you one thing. It's not solid. There are voids inside geometrically perfect cavities, chambers, and in the very center, at a depth of about 65 feet, there's something very massive and dense. It's absorbing all signals." He switched the display, showing magnetometer data. And this is the really weird part. There's a powerful magnetic anomaly around the object, but it's not constant. It's pulsating. At the same frequency Allen reported, 12 hertz. It's like a giant electromagnet underground is being switched on and off 12 times a second. That would require a colossal amount of energy. I can't see a source. The day passed in painstaking work. Evelyn Reed made casts of symbols and photographed each one from multiple angles. Ben Jacobs and his assistants set up a network of seismic sensors across the field to pinpoint the vibration source. Sarah and I worked on expanding the excavation, tried to find any hint of a seam or joint in slabs. Nothing. The structure looked as if it had been cast from a single piece. By midday, I noticed something strange. The sky above us was completely clear, and empty, not a single vulture, which usually circled over the Texas plains searching for carrion, not a single bird. I pointed it out to Sarah. "I noticed too," she replied. "Since this morning. It's silent. Even the insects seem to have thinned out." Jedediah Stone didn't approach us anymore. He sat in the shade of his house, watching from a distance. When I walked over to offer him some water, he looked truly ill. He said the ringing in his ears had become unbearable, and now he was getting dizzy spells. He had trouble focusing his eyes. "The cattle won't come near this pasture for a week now," he said, "even to the trough by the fence. They just stand at the far end, huddled together, scared." Toward evening, Warren pulled me aside. His face was grim. "Alan, this is beyond a university project. 14,000 years. Unknown technology. A language that shouldn't exist. I have to report this to the National Science Foundation, maybe even the Department of Energy. Given what Ben's found, this could be dangerous. You think they'll just come and take it from us?" I asked. "I think we don't have the right to hide a discovery of this magnitude, and we don't have the resources to study it safely. We don't even have a way to open this thing." As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, the entire team gathered by the pit. We had warned Ben and Evelyn, but hearing about it is one thing. Experiencing it is another. Precisely as the sun's disk touched the earth, the vibration ceased. 10 seconds of silence, and then the hum returned. Then Jacob swore under his breath. His sensitive equipment went haywire. All his screens filled with static and then went black. Evelyn Reed gasped. She was staring at the symbols. "Look," she exclaimed. We all stared at the slab. In the darkness, the symbols were indeed glowing. It wasn't my imagination. A faint, cold, phosphorescent white light emanated from the depths of the carved lines. It didn't illuminate anything around it, but it made the patterns clearly visible in the encroaching night. We stood like that for an hour, mesmerized and oppressed by the phenomenon. The hum was a pressure, draining our strength. Suddenly, Sarah, standing at the very edge of the pit, cried out. She was pointing at the ground by her foot. There, on the dry, cracked earth, lay a dead bird, a small field sparrow. It was on its side, its claws curled. There wasn't a scratch on it, no sign of a predator. It looked perfectly whole, as if it had simply been flying along, and its heart had suddenly stopped. We looked around. Within a 50-foot radius of the pit, we found 3 more. Another sparrow, a wren, and a meadowlark, all in the same condition, perfectly intact, just dead. They had fallen from the sky. That night, the hum seemed louder than the last, or maybe our perception had changed. Now we knew it didn't just make a sound, it killed. Dr. Warren no longer hesitated. He walked a few hundred yards from the pit to where the cell signal returned and made a call. I couldn't hear who he was talking to, but when he came back, his face was a mask. "They'll be here in the morning," he said. "We've been ordered to cease all work and touch nothing." He didn't specify who they were, but we all understood. Our work here was over. The archaeologists and scientists were being replaced by very different people. No one slept. The hum felt less like a sound and more like a physical pressure that squeezed all thoughts from your head, leaving only a dull, animalistic dread. We sat in Jedediah's house, each lost in thought. Evelyn Reed sifted through printouts of the symbols over and over. Ben Jacob sketched formulas in a notebook, trying to build a theoretical model for the energy source. Dr. Warren stared silently out the window toward the pit, where a faint glow was visible in the darkness. We were scientists, people who had dedicated our lives to finding answers. And now we were faced with something that didn't ask questions, but was itself one enormous answer we couldn't comprehend. With the first rays of sun, the hum cut out. The ensuing silence was a blessing. We stepped out onto the porch, squinting in the bright light. The air was still. Yesterday's dead birds were still lying on the ground, and they had been joined by new ones. The number had increased overnight. We counted more than 20 corpses in the immediate vicinity of the pit. No insects, no signs of scavengers. They just lay there, untouched. The vehicles arrived around 7 a.m. 3 black, unmarked SUVs had turned off the highway and kicked up a cloud of dust as they drove down the track to the ranch. They stopped about 50 yards from the house. 6 people got out, 5 men and 1 woman. They weren't in military uniform. They wore practical cargo pants, button-down shirts, and light jackets. Their faces were calm and focused. They moved with the synchronized efficiency of a team that had worked together for a long time. One of them, a man in his 40s wearing a stark gray suit that looked out of place in the dust and heat, broke off from a group and walked toward us. He wasn't smiling. "Dr. Warren?" he asked. His voice was quiet, devoid of any inflection. "Yes," Miles replied, stepping forward to meet him. "I'm the one you spoke with on the phone yesterday. We are assuming jurisdiction over the site. I'll need you and your team to gather all your data, records, and samples and turn them over to us. After that, you'll be free to leave." He didn't introduce himself or show any credentials until Warren asked. Then he silently handed him a folder. Miles read the papers for several minutes, his face growing darker. It was a warrant, signed by a federal judge, citing articles related to national security and strategic resources. It granted them authority for any and all actions on this territory, overriding Jedediah Stone's property rights and our university's jurisdiction. The handover took less than an hour. They took everything: laptops, flash drives with the GPR data, the rock samples, the cast of symbols Evelyn had made, every notebook and field journal. They worked methodically and quickly, placing everything into specialized containers. They didn't ask about our conclusions or theories. They only wanted the raw data. While this was happening, their team was already deploying their own equipment around the pit. It was an order of magnitude more advanced than ours. The portable sensors they placed around the perimeter looked like military-grade hardware. They cordoned off the entire excavation area with tape that bore no writing, just a red stripe on a white background. Jedediah Stone came out of his house. He looked lost and sick. He approached the man in the suit. "This is my land," he said, his voice trembling. "What's happening here?" The man in the suit looked at him without a shred of expression. "Mr. Stone, for your own safety, we must ask you to remain within the confines of your house. Food and any necessities will be delivered to you. Your continued presence here will be reevaluated. For now, you are under quarantine." "Quarantine? I'm in my own home." Jedediah protested. "Your home is temporarily part of a restricted access zone. This is not negotiable." The man in the suit cut him off and turned away, making it clear the conversation was over. They gathered all of us at Stone's kitchen table. A thick stack of papers and a pen were placed in front of each of us. It was a non-disclosure agreement. 20 pages of legalese that boiled down to one thing. We would forget everything we had seen. We were forbidden from discussing it with anyone. Not colleagues, not family, not the press. The penalty for violation wasn't just a fine, but prison time under the Espionage Act. "This is standard procedure," the man in the suit explained dispassionately as we read. "The government thanks you for your work. Your involvement in this project is now concluded." Signing it was humiliating. It was a renunciation of what was possibly the greatest discovery in human history. But we had no choice. Ben Jacobs tried to argue, speaking of scientific duty, but the man in the suit silenced him with a single look. "Your scientific duty is now to remain silent," he said. I was the last to speak with Jedediah before we left. He was sitting on his porch, staring into the distance. I asked him how he was feeling. "Bad, Doc," he answered, not turning his head. "The ringing in my left ear is gone. Now I just can't hear nothing out of it at all. And the right one is ringing so loud, my head's about to split open." His hands, resting on his knees, started twitching again with a fine tremor. He didn't seem to notice. We left under the escort of one of their SUVs, which followed us all the way to the highway. Looking back, I could see heavy equipment already arriving at the ranch. Large military trucks and a mobile drilling rig far more powerful than ours. We didn't drive straight back to Austin. We checked into a motel in the nearest town, Ozona. No one wanted to talk. We couldn't just slide back into normal life. That evening, I sat in front of my laptop, scanning the local news. The county newspaper's website had a small article. "Texas Parks and Wildlife investigates mass songbird deaths in Crockett County." Preliminary theory: outbreak of avian virus or poisoning from new pesticides. Local residents advised to avoid the area of the Stone Ranch. They worked fast, creating a plausible cover story. We spent 2 more days in Ozona. During that time, the number of dead birds, according to the news, grew to several hundred. Then, the news reports on the subject stopped completely. On the 3rd day, a car pulled up to our motel. One of the men in plain clothes was behind the wheel. He delivered a recommendation from his superiors that we return to Austin immediately and resume our normal activities. It was a polite form of an expulsion order. 9 days after our first visit to the ranch, we were driving on the highway toward Austin. I was scrolling through a news feed on my phone. A new article had appeared. Environmental situation in Crockett County stabilized. Officials state no threat to population. Not a word about the cause, not a word about the ranch. The story had been buried. I turned off my phone. We, the discoverers, had been erased from the story. We had simply been deleted. I stared out the window at the passing, sun-scorched Texas landscape. Somewhere out there, beyond the horizon, crawler transporters and cranes were, right at that moment, surrounding the black cube that had come from the abyss of time. I didn't know what they planned to do with it. Study it, try to open it, or remove it whole. But I knew one thing. The hum we had heard wasn't just a sound. It was a countdown, and we had no idea what would happen when it reached 0. Return to Austin was like waking up from major surgery. The world around us was the same. Students hurried to lectures. Cars hummed on the streets. Life went on, but we had changed. We moved through this world like ghosts, carriers of knowledge that could not be spoken aloud. An atmosphere of quiet conspiracy settled over the department. The members of the expedition, me, Sarah, Dr. Warren Ben Jacobs, and Evelyn Reed, avoided eye contact. We'd say hello, discuss work matters, but no one ever mentioned the Stone Ranch. It was a gaping hole in our shared history that we all tacitly agreed to walk around. A week passed, then a month. The information vacuum was absolute. Every day I checked news archives, searching for keywords: Crockett County, ecological anomaly, Jedediah Stone. Nothing. The articles about the bird deaths had been deleted. It was as if an invisible hand had swept through the digital space and scrubbed every trace. This was more frightening than any threat. They weren't just hiding the truth. They were rewriting reality. I couldn't stand it. One evening, sitting in my office, I found the old record with the phone number for the Stone Ranch. I called several times. Long rings, then a fast, busy signal. The line had been disconnected. I tried to look up the property records in the online county database. The title for Jedediah Stone's property was there, but overlaid on it was a note: access restricted. Federal order no followed by a long alphanumeric code. The land was still as on paper, but in reality, it had been seized. Life became a routine poisoned by paranoia. Every black SUV that drove past made my heart clench. Every call from an unknown number made me freeze. I started sleeping badly. Sometimes I thought I could hear that low, oppressive hum again, and would wake up in a cold sweat. It had been almost 2 months when the wall of silence showed its first crack. An email arrived in my anonymous work inbox from an address made of a meaningless string of letters and numbers. It contained a single line: Perry Castaneda Library. Tomorrow at 3, rare map section. I didn't know the sender, but I guessed. Only one person in our group would be that interested in old maps: Evelyn Reed. The next day I was there. The university library was vast and hushed. In the designated section, among shelves of ancient atlases, I saw her. Evelyn had changed drastically. She had lost weight. There were dark shadows under her eyes. Her usually neat hair was disheveled. She kept glancing around nervously. "Thanks for coming, Alan," she whispered, not looking at me, pretending to study a folio. "We can't talk for long." "What's happened, Evelyn?" She pulled several sheets of paper from a folder. They were her own hand-drawn sketches of the symbols from the slab. She had recreated them from memory with astonishing accuracy. "I couldn't stop thinking about them," she said, her voice strained and breaking. "They took the cast, but they didn't take my memory. I've been working on them every day. It's not just a language. I was wrong. It's so much more. She pointed a trembling finger at the circular diagram. This isn't a narrative. It's an instruction manual, a technical schematic, like an engine blueprint or a chemical reaction formula. Each symbol isn't a word, but an operator, a variable, and they describe a cyclical process. Her eyes had a feverish glint. I analyzed the syntax, the logic of their arrangement. There are initial conditions, a sequence of phases. The vibration we felt, that's phase 1, preparation, energy accumulation, the hum and the glow. Phase 2, active mode. But there's a third phase, and it appears to be the final one. What kind of phase? I asked. I don't know. The symbols describing it have no analogs, even within this system. They're unique, but the entire logic of the structure leads to it. This isn't just a box that hums, Alan. It's a device executing a program. And we found it in the middle of its cycle. It's not a relic. It's a machine that's still working. A chill ran down my spine. The hum wasn't just a side effect. It was part of the process. Is there anything else? I asked. Evelyn nodded, her face hardening. I wanted to know what happened to Mr. Stone. I hired a private investigator, a quiet ex-cop. He found his distant niece in San Antonio. She paused, gathering her strength. Jedediah was moved from the ranch a month after we left, not to a hospital. He was taken to Walter Reed National Military Medical Center in Maryland. The niece was told he has a rare form of rapid-onset dementia with atypical neurological symptoms. He's completely deaf, constant epileptic seizures. He doesn't recognize anyone, doesn't speak. They're keeping him in an isolated wing under constant observation. He's the first documented case of long-term interaction with the object. I felt sick. We left him there. We let them take him and turn him into a lab animal. And that's not all, Evelyn continued, her whisper becoming almost inaudible. The PI talked to people in Crockett County. About a month ago, there was a massive nighttime operation. All roads leading to the ranch were blocked by the military for miles around. Locals saw a convoy of enormous lowboy transporters, the kind they used to move missile stages or tanks. They were heading toward the ranch, and they left before dawn. A week later, the blockade was lifted. She looked me straight in the eye. He drove out there, the investigator. The pit is gone. In its place is a giant concrete slab, poured over several acres. They dug it out, Alan. They took the entire cube. I was silent, trying to process the scale of what had happened. This 14,000-year-old mechanism, killing all life around it, humming with energy that shouldn't exist, was no longer buried under a Texas field. They had loaded it onto trucks and taken it away. Where? It was the only question I could manage. Nobody knows, Evelyn replied, starting to quickly gather her papers. Nevada, Utah, some underground bunker in the Appalachian Mountains. It could be anywhere now. Near a city, near a reservoir, near a military base. They think they control it, but they don't understand what they found. They brought a time bomb into their house, and they don't know when it's set to go off. She left, leaving me alone among the dusty maps of dead empires. Her last words echoed in my head. We didn't just find an ancient artifact. We unleashed it on the modern world. And now it was somewhere close in the darkness, continuing its quiet, monotonous countdown, approaching a third phase that none of us could predict. A year went by. Time is a strange thing. It doesn't heal wounds, as they say. It just builds up scar tissue over them, thick and numb. I continue to teach. I lecture on the Clovis culture and Mimbres pottery, and the words felt hollow and meaningless. How could I talk about stone spearheads, knowing that at the very same time they were being made, the black cube lay beneath the earth, built with technology that outstripped ours by millennia? My passion for the past was dead. It had been replaced by a quiet, exhausting apathy. The team had scattered. Dr. Warren took early retirement, citing health problems. Ben Jacobs transferred to a university in Alaska, as far away from it all as he could get. Sarah Jenkins, my brilliant grad student, simply left academia. She told me that after what we found, she couldn't take pottery shards and bones seriously anymore. I didn't try to change her mind. Evelyn Reed had vanished. She resigned from the university a few months after our talk in the library, and no one knew where she'd gone. We had become strangers to each other, united not by a shared secret, but by the shared shame of our silence. I had almost learned to live with it, with the constant low-level anxiety, with the nightmares where I heard the hum again. I had almost convinced myself that they, the ones who took the object, had it under control, that it was safely hidden somewhere deep inside a mountain and the world was safe. And then, a year and 3 months after the events at the ranch, I saw the first news story. It was minor, lost in the stream of other events. Neurologists concerned by outbreak of atypical migraines in Lincoln County, Nevada, the small town of Rachel and its surroundings were reporting dozens of cases in the last month. The symptoms: acute headaches, loss of balance, and bouts of tinnitus, a ringing in the ears. I froze. Lincoln County, Nevada, home to Area 51 and the Nevada National Security Site. The perfect place to hide something you don't want anyone to find. 2 weeks later, a second article appeared. U.S. Geological Survey detects strange seismic anomalies in same region. Not an earthquake. Microtremors of a constant low frequency, 12 hertz. My breath caught in my throat. They hadn't just hidden it, they had activated it, and it was leaking. Its influence was no longer contained to a few dozen feet. It was spreading, poisoning the land and the people around it. The symptoms of the Rachel residents were a precise, albeit diluted, copy of what had happened to Jedediah Stone. I had to find Evelyn. It was harder than I thought. She'd left no forwarding address. Her bank accounts were closed. She had evaporated. I spent 2 weeks using all my research skills. I scoured subscription lists for academic journals, library archives, searched her name on amateur linguistics forums. Finally, I found a trace. A request for a rare book on Babylonian astronomy at the Salt Lake City Public Library. The request was made under a pseudonym, but I recognized her handwriting on the scanned library card. I flew to Utah. I found her in a small rental house on the outskirts of the city. She didn't open the door right away. She looked at me through a crack, fear in her eyes. She looked terrible, gray-haired, gaunt. The room behind her was cluttered with books, star charts, and printouts. Foil was taped over the windows. "I knew you'd come," she rasped, letting me in. "You've seen the news, too? What's happening, Evelyn? What are they doing to it?" She gave a bitter laugh. "The same thing our species always does when it finds a bigger stick than the neighbors. They try to turn it into a weapon or a power source. They thought it was a perpetual motion machine. They started drilling into it, trying to tap into it. The idiots, they thought it would obey their rules." She went to a wall covered with diagrams connecting her sketches of the symbols to astronomical charts. "I've been working this whole time. Alan, I was wrong before. It's not just an instruction manual for a machine. It's a map and a schedule." She jabbed a finger at the central circle of symbols. "This isn't a power source. It's a transmitter, a resonator. Its purpose isn't to affect the Earth. The Earth is just a platform for the antenna. All of it, the vibration, the hum, the magnetic field, the light, it's all a process of tuning, accumulation, and focus to send a single targeted signal. A signal to where? Out there." She waved a hand toward the star charts. "To deep space, to a specific point. I don't know what's there, a star, a planet, something else. But the entire geometry of the symbols points to specific coordinates in the constellation Draco." She looked at me, her eyes wild. "It's not a weapon. It's a beacon, or maybe a distress call, or a starting pistol. And the neurological damage. The dead birds, they're just side effects, like the noise and exhaust from a giant engine. To it, we're just ants scurrying at the base of a power plant. It doesn't even notice us." The realization was so monstrous, I had to sit down. It all fit. Their attempts to open it, to study it, had only damaged the insulation, accelerated the process. They weren't controlling it. They had broken it. They have to realize what's happening. I said, with a sliver of hope. "They'll stop." Evelyn looked at me with pity. It's too late. The process is irreversible. They started it, but they don't have an off switch. The cycle must be completed. They already know. 2 weeks ago, Area 51 and the entire test site were fully evacuated of all personnel. It's unprecedented. They know something is coming, but they're powerless. She walked to a calendar on the wall. Several dates were circled in red. What's more, I know when it will happen, she said quietly. The device's entire operation is tied to gravitational and electromagnetic fields. It needs a precise balance. It's using the planets of the solar system as gravitational lenses to focus the signal. Its whole program is just waiting for a specific planetary alignment. A rare alignment of Jupiter, Saturn, and Earth relative to the target in Draco. It provides a perfect gravitational corridor for the signal. She took a red marker and circled another date. It will happen in 17 days. October 26th at 3:14 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. She turned to me. The fear was gone from her eyes, replaced by the boundless, calm exhaustion of someone who has read a book to the end and knows how it finishes. Phase 3. It's not an explosion, Alan. It's a broadcast. We don't know what's in the message, and we don't know who will hear it. But in 17 days, the entire world will witness what happens when humanity, having found a locked door in its basement, breaks it down and makes a call to a number that should have never existed. 17 days. It's not long when you're waiting for a vacation, and an eternity when you're waiting for the end of the world that no one but you knows about. Evelyn. And I didn't try to warn anyone. Who would we write to? The newspapers? We would have been laughed at and arrested the next day for violating the NDA. We were two Cassandras in a world that preferred to remain blind. The last 2 weeks felt like a surreal play. The government's damage control was flawless. The outbreak in Nevada was officially blamed on a leak of experimental chemicals from the test site. Compensation payments began. The massive evacuation of Area 51 was explained as a planned, large-scale nuclear threat simulation. Experts appeared on the news every day, smiling and assuring the public that everything was under control. They were trying so desperately to maintain the appearance of order, knowing the very foundation of their world was about to crack. Evelyn and I didn't stay in Salt Lake City. We decided to be witnesses. There was no point in hiding or running. Where would we run? We got in my car and drove south back to Texas. Our journey began there, and it should end there. Our destination was the McDonald Observatory in the Davis Mountains, one of the darkest places in North America, perfect for watching the stars. We didn't try to get onto the observatory grounds. We found a secluded hill a few miles away, with a panoramic view of the sky. We spent the last 2 days there. We hardly spoke. Words were superfluous. We had brought water, food, and 2 sleeping bags. We sat under the vast, indifferent sky and waited. The night of October 26th was cold and crystal clear. The stars shone so brightly, they looked like shards of glass scattered across black velvet. The Milky Way cut across the heavens, a wide, misty river. I looked at the constellation Draco, hanging high in the northern sky. Just ordinary stars. An ordinary constellation. We sat side by side, wrapped in our sleeping bags. Evelyn held a mechanical chronometer. Electronics might fail. 3 a.m. 3:10 a.m. The silence was absolute. No crickets, no nocturnal animals. It was as if all of nature was holding its breath. 3:13 a.m. And then it began. I felt it before I heard it. The familiar, low vibration pulsing through the earth. But this time it was different. It didn't come from a single point. It felt as if the planet itself was vibrating, very gently, like the string of an immense cello. 3:14 a.m., precisely on schedule. To the west, in the direction of Nevada, the horizon flashed. But it wasn't like an explosion. A perfectly straight, vertical pillar of light rose from behind the mountains. It wasn't blindingly bright, but dense, a matte white, as if cast from solid matter. It didn't illuminate the clouds or scatter in the atmosphere. It simply went straight up, a silent, unmoving line piercing the night. It was aimed directly at the heart of Draco. Simultaneously, the hum that had once been a local phenomenon became global. I didn't hear it with my ears. It resonated directly in my skull and my bones in my chest. 12 hertz, the language the universe spoke. All the electric lights in the valley below, the lights of the distant observatory, flickered for a moment and died. I glanced at the compass line beside me. The needle was spinning frantically. The pillar of light stood motionless. There was no movement in it, no energy in the human sense. It was pure signal. Information given the form of light, flying through the void at a speed we couldn't comprehend. A phone call across the abyss of time and space. It lasted for 3 minutes and 14 seconds. Evelyn tracked it on the chronometer. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the pillar of light vanished. It just switched off. The hum in my head ceased. The vibration of the earth stilled. The lights in the valley flickered back on. Everything returned to normal. The silence that followed was even deeper than before. The sky was the same. The stars shone just as they had 5 minutes ago. Nothing had changed. Tomorrow, the sun would rise. Politicians would make statements about a rare atmospheric phenomenon. Life would go on. We stared at the sky, at the constellation Draco. Evelyn raised her binoculars. Her hands were steady. She looked at one point for a long time. "Alan," she called very quietly. I took the binoculars from her and aimed them where the beam had pointed, toward the star Thuban, which was once our North Star during the age of the pyramids. I watched it for a few seconds. An ordinary star, a faint point of light. And then, for a fraction of a second, it flared. It grew brighter, just for an instant, but it was completely distinct. Its light intensified, and then returned to its normal magnitude. It wasn't atmospheric twinkling. It was something else. The message had been sent, and on the other end of the line, someone had just picked up the phone.